Welcome back to the Meeting You podcast. I am your host, Emily Bradbury. This is lesson 2 of our 4-part Basics of Personal Growth series. And today is definitely going to be a bit more intellectually driven episode rather than really emotional or intuitive. So my objectives today is to give you a review of how our brain works when it comes to controlling our actions, our bodies, our thoughts, our actions and responses. I'll be explaining how it shapes who we are and how we react to the world, and this will be important information to helping understand why certain principles that you'll learn in your personal growth journey help reshape your identity and reality, even our responses to how we talk and feel about others. We will dive into trauma and how trauma is not just having a hardcore childhood or witnessing a catastrophic event. And in the next lesson, we will discuss how different practices in personal growth help reshape the old you into the new you. So first, let's start with our brain. This is the basics to get to know the present you and how it's holding you back from the higher you that I discussed in the trailer of this podcast. Our brain is the root of how we think, how we act, and why we respond to certain people, places, and situations the way that we do. It really is literally who we are. A statement as simple as, I like this food, or I like this person, is simply a result of the brain interpreting certain signals and stimuli, which, by the way, can contribute to why personal growth can be difficult because you're literally remapping who you are through adjusting how you respond to stimuli. But before we dive in, I want you to remember this example and just put it in a little pocket in your brain. A person with hydrophobia gets too close to the ocean and their anxiety spikes up. Their heart rate goes up. They begin to panic. Their friend, on the other hand, sits peacefully beside them. This applies to reacting to certain people as well. But let's dive into why, on a biological level and an anatomical level, how this translates to personal development. So to get us started off, the brain is like a command center, constantly receiving, processing, and sending signals to help us navigate through life. So here's a basic breakdown of the brain's general functioning program. So first we have sensory input. This is the brain collecting information from the senses, so sight, sound, touch, taste, and smell, through nerves and sensory organs. For example, if you touch something hot, sensory receptors in your skin send signals to the brain. Number 2 is processing. The information is processed primarily in the cerebral cortex, the outer layer of the brain. Different parts of the cortex specialize in different tasks, such as visual processing and the occipital lobe, or decision making, which is the frontal lobe. Number 3, decision making. The brain evaluates the information based on past experiences, goals, and emotions. The prefrontal cortex is key here. It's weighing the pros and cons and deciding what to do. And then number 4 is the action command. Once a decision is made, the brain sends a signal through the nervous system to muscular or other parts of the body. So for example, if you decide to pick up a cup, the motor cortex in the brain sends instructions to your arms and hand muscles. Number 5, the feedback and adjustment. The brain constantly monitors the outcome of its actions. So the movement or decision needs adjustment. The brain will send new commands and refine the process. So it makes sense so far, right? So our senses notice something. The brain assesses it by accessing all the knowledge of your lifetime instantly to determine if it's safe or not safe, and the proper way to respond through thoughts, actions, and even physiology. Once making that decision, it tells the rest of the body how to execute the proper response, such as run, back up, inhale, exhale, smile, laugh, etc. After the action response is executed, the brain evaluates how that action was received by the people and the environment around you, and even within yourself. Then it adjusts, typically by either making micro adjustments, reinforcing the response action, or throwing it out altogether. But what specifically is going on in your brain, and how can personal growth rewire that? Try to follow me here, as this is a little bit more complex to break down. So how the brain reacts. First, we have our sensory input and signal transmission. Sensory organs detect stimuli and send signals to the brain via neurons. The thalamus a sensory relay station, directs these signals to appropriate brain regions for processing. The amygdala's role, the amygdala, part of the limbic system, accesses the emotional significance of the stimuli. If the stimulus is perceived as a threat, the amygdala activates the fight or flight response by signaling the hypothalamus to release stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol. And then we have the higher level processing. So the prefrontal cortex, or PFC, responsible for rational thinking and decision making, evaluates the amygdala's signals. In stressful situations, the PFC may be overridden by the amygdala's urgent signals, leading to impulsive reactions. And then we have neurotransmitter activity. Neurotransmitters like glutamate and GABA modulate neuronal communication. So dopamine and serotonin may influence mood and behavior during reactions. So that was a lot of information, so let's summarize. The thalamus is responsible for taking sensory signals to the right part of the brain to function. The amygdala tells us how emotionally significant it is. So if it's really significant, aka a perceived threat, the key word here is perceived threat, it will trigger the fight or flight response by telling the hypothalamus to release stress hormones. It makes us panic or feel uncomfortable in some way. The prefrontal cortex, when not in fight or flight, will make rational decisions and make rational actions. AKA, if you're not a hydrophobic, you won't feel anxiety if you're safely on land next to water. If you are in fight or flight mode, depending on how emotionally stressing the situation feels or is interpreted by the amygdala will override the prefrontal cortex, and you're more likely to have impulse reactions and make impulsive decisions. AKA, if you're hydrophobic, when you see the ocean, even if you're safely on land, in extreme cases where the amygdala is totally overstimulated, you may scream, panic, push your friend in the water. You get the gist. Another example you might find more relatable. You see your ex who you broke up with recently. Your brain accesses all the memories, the shared moments, the intimacy, the sex, etc., all in an instant. And there is an association in the brain between your ex and things such as love, acceptance, safety. Your heart may flutter or feel like it's clenching. Your eyes follow them in the room, or even if you're not looking at them, you're hyper aware of where they are in the room. A few months later, your brain has had time to recover, and without the constant stimulus of your ex and that association, you start to work on yourself and you find love, safety, and acceptance in other areas, and you create new neural pathways, and by the time you see him again, the reaction may be less intense or gone altogether. If the ex or another person in your life was toxic or hit you, it's possible a fight or flight response may trigger every time you see them, which you may be familiar with the term PTSD. That's one symptom example. And until you learn to rewire the brain response every time you see them, you'll probably panic. But this also applies to faulty systems in the brain. For example, if you grew up in a turbulent household, maybe your parents fought a lot, maybe they were verbally abusive, maybe they beat each other, your brain, it does not know right or wrong. We kind of determine that on another level on our own. Our brain is neutral. So even though something may not feel great and we know logically something isn't right, even though we may say to ourselves, I'm not going to end up like my parents or have a relationship like them, we end up attracting partners who are also like that on some level. We're repeating the emotions that we felt towards our parents as children unless you rewire it. So let me tell you the absolute best part. You can rewire it. Let me explain the why and how. So neuroplasticity refers to the brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections throughout life. It allows the brain to adapt, learn, and recover from experiences. Synaptic pruning, these are connections that are frequently used, becoming stronger, while unused ones are weakened or eliminated. So this is through the dendrites in the brain, which are branch-like extensions of neurons or nerve cells that receive signals from other neurons and transmit them toward the neuron's cell body. AKA, these are little buggers who determine if when we see water we scream or not, if you're a hydrophobe. But the dendrites grow stronger or weaker through synaptic pruning based on how often they are used in neural communication. Here's a quick breakdown. If we want to strengthen connections, when two neurons frequently communicate, their connection is reinforced through a process called long-term potentiation. It's LTP. More neurotransmitters are released, and the dendritic spines, which are small protrusions on dendrites where synapses form, grow in size and number. This increases the efficiency and the strength of that connection, making it easier for signals to pass in the future. If you want to weaken or loosen connections, when a neural pathway is rarely used, the connection undergoes long-term depression, LTD. Dendrite spines shrink. Fewer neurotransmitter receptors are present at the synapse. Eventually, the unused connections may be eliminated entirely, conserving energy and refining the brain's network. So the role of experiences is learning, practicing, or repeatedly experiencing something strengthens relevant connections. On the flip side, disuse or replacing old habits weakens and prunes away those connections, making space for new growth. This is how the brain adapts and optimizes itself for efficiency through experience-driven neuroplasticity. So let's say even though you want a super healthy relationship, you keep attracting partners who leave you unfulfilled, and in worst case scenarios, downright anxious or toxic. Through personal development, through rewiring faulty signals that determine what is familiar from childhood, which may be a red flag to the type of partner you really want, you are able to retrain your brain to stop going after one type of person and even liking a new type of person, or to like water instead of panicking at it if you're a hydrophobe. So how do we do this? I'll explain that shortly, but we have one concept left related to the brain. That brings us to our first official term. Trauma. So, definition is a deeply distressing or disturbing experience that can have long-lasting psychological, emotional, and physical effects. Trauma can stem from a wide range of experiences, including abuse, loss, accidents, or chronic stress. Unprocessed trauma can lead to emotional pain, self-sabotage, and difficulties in relationships and mental health. Example, a childhood neglect, experiencing a car accident, witnessing a traumatic event that resulted in persistent feelings of fear, anxiety, or depression. I would also like to add that trauma is completely subjective to the person and shouldn't be compared to what I like to call cookie-cutter trauma, aka extreme cases like abuse, human trafficking, witnessing suicide, etc. Trauma that is worked through in personal growth can also appear as certain agreements we make at some point in our life that end up impacting our self-confidence, our self-esteem, or our beliefs about ourselves. For example, let's say you're in kindergarten and you're a confident, fun kid, but one day in class, a teacher chastises you for being too loud, or your parents say that you're being a nuisance while they're frustrated at something, or another kid hears you singing in choir and says either to your face or behind your back that you can't sing. Some part of your developing brain can cling to that or any other type of observation you made as a kid, and it becomes you. Suddenly, you're too much. You're too loud. You're a bad singer. You're annoying. This can create anything from insecurity about yourself to judgment or jealousy at other people who display these traits that you put yourself down for. It plants that signal in your brain that you are not enough. And if you're not enough, you won't be accepted and you'll be alone. As irrational as it is, at our core, the brain operates in a primal state. This is a good thing to have, by the way, because if a nuclear bomb dropped or an apocalypse happened, or if you were dropped in the middle of nowhere after a plane crash or a boat crash, your brain still has some of those instincts to keep you alive, even if a Publix or a house isn't close by. The bad news is that it's quite irrational for this day and age, and it doesn't really care that it's irrational. If you're not enough, the tribe kicks you out. If the tribe kicks you out, you're alone. And if you're alone, in tribal times, thousands of years ago, you're dead. So if you learned at some point that you're too much or you're not enough, your brain hates that because its one job is to keep you alive and functioning properly. Otherwise, it wouldn't really send signals to you saying when you're hungry or unsafe. So it remembers that signal, it adds some emotional significance to it, and it continues to search for evidence of ways that you're annoying or too much. The brain does not care about your ego. It does not care that it makes you feel insecure or lose confidence or self-esteem. It is a neutral operating system whose only job is to keep you alive, whether you like it or not. But with improper conditioning, it will continue to look for evidence that you are not enough, so your reality becomes, I'm too loud, I need to be more quiet, I need to be less annoying, blah, 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 blah. And you spend your life putting on a mask on who you think you need to be enough and passing judgment on others who embrace the things that you're ridiculed for. I have good news for you. Through personal growth, you can change beliefs about yourself and learn to embrace and love yourself for it and operate truly from authenticity, happiness, self-acceptance, which is the most freeing thing you can do for yourself. So, how do we start rewiring traumas and faulty belief systems from our bodies? Well, that is what our next episode will be about, where we're going to dive in on different practices and different techniques that you can use to start rewiring that. But I hope you guys love today's podcast. Can't wait to see you on the next episode. Have a lovely weekend, you guys.